Hello and welcome to Straight Talk, brought to you by Straight Furrow. I'm Karen McCarthy. On the program this week, future-proofing the agriculture sector, the drive to attract our young people back onto the land, into careers in agriculture beyond the farm gate, taking it to the kids. 18 months on from the first big Canterbury earthquake, never mind the red zone. What about the lives and livelihoods of the quake-hit farming communities? We hear about the lasting impact on the rural sector. And after 35 years as the man from MAF, Philip Journeaux looks back and lets us know what he's up to now. He says he's come full circle, joining Ag First this week as an agricultural consultant. Congratulations on the new position.
Thank you, Karen.
Also with us in the studio this week is Sara Russell, the network manager with New Zealand Young Farmers and a prime mover behind the Get Ahead Careers in Agriculture program. Phil, 35 years with MAF, that's quite a lag. You say you've come full circle, you're advising farmers still in your new role.
Yes, when I first joined MAF, Karen, it was as a farm advisor based in the far north initially, and been through a number of aspects in my career, but as you say, just joined Ag First consultancy firm, so I'm back advising farmers and corporates.
You must have seen so many changes in the industry over that time. Is it still in a good place and a healthy state?
Well, it's been through some pretty sort of highs and lows over that time, through the 80s with all the restructuring and reforms there. At the moment, well, pastoral agriculture is in a pretty good place in a general sense. Horticulture, most of the horticultural industries have got their problems at the moment.
Kiwi fruit is the one that springs to mind.
Yes, well, kiwi fruit with the PSA disease, pip fruit suffering in terms of low returns and very tight margins on orchard, and grapes sort of just coming out of the wine glut, if you like.
But dairy, sheep, lamb, beef?
Well, looking good. The last 2 years have been very good. I mean, sheep and beef very tough through the last decade, but the last 2 years is good, and the immediate future looks quite good as well.
Sara, your role, one of them, I guess, with young farmers is trying to make agriculture, make careers in agriculture sexy to young people. Are there lots of young farmers out there? Phil's saying, you know, maybe there are some areas that are struggling, but there's a lot of promise and potential there. How is it trying to get young people turned on to agriculture these days?
It's interesting. Just yesterday we had a careers program in South Auckland, and we had almost 100 kids from schools as far as north as Whangarei girls. And at the start of the day we always ask them something like, you know, how many of you are interested in agriculture and are here for agriculture? And not that many put their hands up. And how many are here for a day off school? And most of them put their hand up. But by the end of the day, it's very much in the favour of agriculture. And it's good for us to see that when we actually display what careers are on option right from paddock to plate, then young people are understanding the value and the opportunities that there are in agriculture.
Is there still a perception that if you go into agriculture, that means you want to work on a farm? Yes. A perception that perhaps you want to dispel?
Yeah, and what we're seeing for our young farmers is that increasingly we have young people who they might go to university and go into rural banking and then go farming and then go consulting, and you know they actually move around quite a lot, and it's not that dissimilar to what's happening with the urban working environment.
Sorry, Ken, if I could cut in there. I think it's interesting, the perception still very much is sort of gumboots and mud, and yet agriculture is an incredibly dynamic and complex industry, and I'd say it's probably one of the most technologically advanced industries in New Zealand, but you never get to hear that sort of thing.
That's true.
And is that partly why there's been a drift away and why there is such a seemingly a big gulf between urban and country now?
I think so, yes.
And people in schools don't realise that, so teachers and careers advisors aren't realising that, you know, there's space for everyone. So when we target the audience for the Get Ahead Careers Days, we're looking at kids who are studying business and science and maths as much of those who are in the Ag Hawk classes. The Ag Hawk classes, generally those kids are going to be captured, and what we want to do is have our young people realise that, you know, agriculture can be the secondary part of your interest. If your interest is business or science, there's a million opportunities for you.
Do you think, Phil, young people realise the opportunities that are out there when assessing where they want to be in the future and what their careers will be?
Well, at this point in time, Karen, I'd say no to that. If you look at the number of graduates coming through the universities in terms of science and agriculture, very low. And yet, as I say, it's a very technologically advanced industry, and the average farm is a multi-million-dollar business, and you need a lot of skills to run it. But yet, we seem to struggle to get that perception across.
Why is that, do you think?
As soon as you get involved with the agricultural industry, you can see it. But there's an element where I think farmers are busy doing their thing, and they don't really necessarily look outside the farm gate to realise that, you know, other people are trying to look over the fences and seeing not just what they're doing in regards to like an environmental and all the regulatory sort of stuff, but actually the cool stuff that they're doing and the freedom that, you know, working in agriculture and working outside provides. The lifestyle that you get, I mean, farmers work extremely hard, as do those who are working in the labs in Fonterra or those who are marketing things for agriculture, whether they work for beef and lamb or whoever it is. They all work really hard because we're passionate about the industry, and that's the thing that I think when people are looking into farms, they realise that the passion's there for the whole of the industry, and we understand that we are growing food, and what's more important than that?
Agriculture's relative importance has reduced over the last 20, 30 years, but it still is a dominant industry. Is it up to farmers to market that industry, or do you think perhaps it's government, education system, the private sector that maybe needs to get out there and sell agriculture?
The government is investing in it through PGP funding, which is coming through for young farmers, and the promotion we do through beef and lamb, soon to be hopefully, and Dairy NZ. So the government's recognising the value. I think there's a little bit of tall poppy syndrome with farmers. They're very, very conscious of being public, and they try to, I don't know if they actively avoid it, but they do shy away from it. But having said that, there's plenty of successful farmers, and you'll know quite a few, who are happy to talk about what they're doing and the innovations that they're doing. I think also there's an element where, for the country in general, the emphasis is on where the population is, and it's not in the countryside, it's in the cities. So, you know, there's kind of a logical reason why farming has not got quite the profile it should have.
Phil, do you think farmers need to be louder and prouder about what they do and what they're achieving?
Oh, well, I think so, Karen. I mean, I think the industry as a whole needs to sort of pick up its game and promote itself. I mean, if you look at the Go Dairy TV ads that Dairy NZ have been running, I mean, I think they're very good, and I understand they've been quite successful. They tend to focus very much at the farm level. But you've still got that whole servicing sector type area, and that's where a lot of the technology and a lot of very good jobs and all the rest of it are, but we just generally don't seem to hear much about it.
It's that whole thing about beyond the farm gate, isn't it? As you said, Sarah, there are so many jobs and career opportunities which aren't just, you know, working the land on the land.
Yeah, and we still have the situation where a lot of urban people, and then this is decreasing as the population demographics change, but for a lot of New Zealanders, they still perceive themselves as only a step away from a farm. But if you actually get them to talk about their family history and things like that, they're a couple of generations from the land, but they still perceive themselves as being just one step away, and a lot of, you know, in New Zealand we celebrate using our outdoors, and for a lot of New Zealanders, farming doesn't separate from tramping and things like that. It's another outdoors thing that we do. So we have a strong bond to it, but we not necessarily have a good slant in reality as far as looking over the fence and seeing what farming's about.
And as you said, Phil, it's big business these days, isn't it, too? There's corporate structures, and it's a different ball game nowadays.
Yes, it is, but it's still, Karen, I think one of the quickest ways to become a millionaire, if you like. I mean, it's hard work and it takes time, but the goals are still there, and you know, young farmers are certainly achieving that.
Coming up on Straight Talk, the shifting face of farm ownership in God's Zone. Massive changes tipped in the decade ahead as baby boomer farmers cash up to fund their golden years. With corporates and foreign buyers already making inroads, what's in store? That's after the break. Stay with us. Welcome back to Straight Talk, brought to you by Straight Furrow. I'm Karen McCarthy with Sara Russell and Phil Journeaux. Predominantly for young people entering agriculture, is farm ownership still the goal?
Absolutely is. I mean, increasingly we see people making a career and going to work for corporates as managers, but I think in the heart of hearts most of them still want to own land.
Over the years, 30 years ago when you started out with MAF, I'm sure it was a very different landscape out there. It was a lot of traditional family-owned farms, run farms. What changes have you noticed, Phil, in the last 3 decades?
Well, family farms are still predominant, Karen, but you've certainly seen a lot of corporate type farms, and I would characterise them as what I call family corporates, where you've got one family that now owns 6, 10, 20 farms, particularly in the dairy industry, but they're still New Zealanders. In terms of foreign ownership and foreign corporates, there's still very little of that in New Zealand, despite all the headlines on the media.
That is something we hear a lot about, but you say, let's put things in perspective, that very little New Zealand farmland is actually in foreign hands.
Correct, yes.
What do you make of all the to-do about the Crayford farm sales, for example? That's the big one.
Yes, it is. Well, I don't know. I find it quite interesting because it is a to-do, and at the end of the day, it's a market, and whoever is the highest bidder really is the person who should get it. Now, if New Zealanders can pull together, and we have lots of examples of farmers who are grouping together to buy farms, so the Fay bid is an example of that, but there's plenty of examples out there that does happen. But what I find really interesting is there are a lot of iwi who are getting the capital to set up their plant and their dairy farms and things like that, and they're contracting to supply these markets overseas, and nobody says a word about that. But as soon as Chinese people look at buying New Zealand land, suddenly that's an issue. But in actual fact, the amount of land bought by Chinese nationals is really quite small compared to other nationalities who are buying land in New Zealand.
What's the feeling you get from out there, Phil? Are New Zealand farmers feeling threatened, or is this an opportunity for them?
Well, in terms of my experience, Karen, talking with a number of farmers, I guess most of them would take a similar view to Sara. There's an open market out there, there's a free market, you put your farm on the market, the highest bidder gets it. And we've been selling land quite happily to a number of foreigners. It just, for whatever reason, with the Chinese bid for Crayford, it's got the media attention and everyone's up in arms. Personally, I can't see any problem with it.
Where do you think this is going to end up? We've been waiting weeks. We thought we'd know by now. It's taken, I think, 6-7 weeks. The OIO has been reviewing its recommendation. Where do you think this is going to end up when we finally hear?
Well, I'm not sure. I think the OIO and the government are between a rock and a hard place. So they're sort of caught by the economics on one hand and the politics on the other. Which way they go, I've got no idea really.
Would you be concerned if it goes to Shanghai Pingxing?
Not at all. I mean, it depends what people are going to do with the land, doesn't it? I mean, any other group could be splitting them up and selling them off to, I don't know, lifestylers, which of course is the worst thing that can possibly happen to farmland. So, if somebody's actually going to use the land for what its purpose has been, as in dairying or whatever it is, then surely that's an asset to our industry in general.
The New Zealanders, you talked about the Michael Fay-led consortium, which was the main rival. They were saying nobody can farm this land better than New Zealanders. Why look offshore? Do you think that's the case? Our track record over the years?
I think the Chinese were going to be employing New Zealanders to do the farming. I don't think it was the case that they were going to import a whole big group of employees to run these farms. So that's kind of a ridiculous argument, because in New Zealand we have lots of people who come to New Zealand to learn how we do it, and some of them stay and some of them take it back to wherever they're from. And there's an element where I think with New Zealand farmers, and we create a bit of a mythology about how brilliant we are, because we're brilliant in our own backyard, not necessarily always about everything compared to other people also. So we have plenty to learn, but I would be thinking that they'd be employing New Zealanders to run those farms.
Phil, do we need to look offshore? Do we need to look overseas heading into the future, do you think?
Oh, I think so, Karen, and I mean, we are getting up in arms in terms of foreigners buying land in New Zealand. At the moment, New Zealand farmers are happily buying land in Chile, Uruguay, America, Poland, the Ukraine. So we're doing it to them, and we think, well, that's fine. I'm not quite sure if the Ukrainians are that happy, but I haven't asked any. So it's sort of, 6 one, half dozen the other. Personally, I see no problem whatsoever in foreign investment, either foreigners investing in New Zealand or New Zealand investing overseas.
Let's talk again about the perception of young people. As I say, you've been working, I think, this last couple of weeks on the Get Ahead Careers in Agriculture scheme, which is trying to introduce agriculture to young people, school leavers around the country, and say, hey, consider this as a career option. Do you think it is an attractive option for them at the moment, especially, as Phil mentioned, with all the sort of politics swirling around?
Oh, I don't think that as a generation they actually take that much notice of the politics swirling around. If you ask them their opinion about the Crayford farms, they probably wouldn't have one, other than the small snatches of media that they'd heard. Young people are interested in creating a career any way they can, and hopefully it's something they're interested and passionate about. I think what we're trying to show them is that there are so many options, that, the way that young people work is, staying in a job for 3-4 years and moving on. It's very much how our dairy industry is working. So the ease of movement as a dairy farmer, as an employee, it's there for the taking. And certainly you find people move around the country all of the time. That's why we have Gypsy Day. And as far as the other sectors, the opportunities are there, and you can do so much with the opportunities in the rural sector too. It's not just a case of saying, oh, well, this is my job and this is what I'm restricted to, which is what you tend to find in an urban environment. You live one whole life when you're in the agricultural sector. You don't live a compartmentalised life where you go to work for 8 hours and you travel home and you have a home life. We're about communities and supporting our young people to stay in the communities as much as to stay in their jobs.
It's a lifestyle.
It absolutely is.
Where are the greatest needs, do you think, that need to be filled in the agricultural economy? Where do you need these best and brightest young people to end up in the next 10, 20 years?
Well, they need to be building the industry, and the way that we do it is that they need to take responsibility for what their role is. So whatever role they choose, they need to be the best at it. And if they choose to change that as they go along, that's fine, because effectively every individual in the agricultural sector is a building block, and together we create strength, but individually we're probably not that strong. And there is an element with farmers in particular, that they become quite isolated if they allow that to happen. So that's why community ends up being really important. So for us, it's about making sure you've got knowledgeable, educated, talented people who are doing more, so adding value to what their job is. So whether they're on farm or off, there's plenty of opportunities to create. It's about creating a strong industry, because the industry is always going to change. It's never going to be the same, and especially with the changing scene of farm ownership, people are going to have to get a lot smarter about how they do that.
It's big business, isn't it?
Yes, because I was going to say, Karen, I think the demand is right across that value chain, from the farming, the processing, the servicing sector, etc. As a small example, if you like, over the last few years, I've hired people into vacancies in MAF, and I've always been on the looking out for agricultural economists. They just don't exist out there.
Yep.
And we need more.
And the courses are there if people can only be enticed onto them.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, it's not just that they have to be enticed, it's that they have to realise they could do a conventional economics degree with agriculture. So a lot of what you can do is a standard degree with agriculture all the time. And what we're seeing is, and particularly with young women, is that they've grown up in that rural sector, they're passionate, whatever aspect it is that they've been involved, and they leave the farm or they leave the community and they go to university to do journalism, say. And they just have to kind of realise that the marketing opportunities in agriculture are phenomenal. It's really hard to find agricultural marketers who really know what they're talking about. Because when you're talking about agriculture, you're talking about the spirit of agriculture. It's who we are. It's not a marketing opportunity that's only a couple of inches thick.
I hope some of those young people are out there listening. Time for a short break now. Coming up, more from our guests on Matters Rural, including Canterbury farmers 18 months on from the first big earthquake. There's been so much focus on the devastated city. How are they doing in the country? Back shortly on Straight Talk. Welcome back to Straight Talk, brought to you by Straight Furrow. Sara, we're just talking about the opportunities for youngsters. What kind of money are we talking here? You mentioned 25-year-olds running their own multi-million-dollar businesses. That's incredible.
It is. I mean, it's hard work, but we've got plenty of examples of young farmers, male and female too, who are share milking and are also setting up businesses. We have a regional chair who and her husband share milking either side of the road, so they have their own farms. I know of young people who have, especially those who come through things like the Dairy NZ scholarship program, are getting involved in things, and they're coming out of Lincoln or Massey with really good solid management qualifications, and they're moving into corporate environments, but they're still farming, so they get the luxury of earning really, really good money,
What kind of money?
Well, more than $75,000 a year. And
this is a new graduate?
Yeah, so within 2 years of graduating, they're hitting the really good money.
That should appeal to some people.
Yeah, and it's really interesting too, because if you're in that corporate environment, you still have all the support of the accounts people and stuff like that. So it's not like you're a farmer, doing your books and doing everything you have to do. You actually get to focus solely on the stuff like herd management and animal health and pasture and the things that perhaps are more interesting to some people. Some probably might be more interested in the backroom stuff.
Phil, it'd be fair to say maybe in years gone by, and this may be a perception that persists, is that agriculture, farming, going to Massey, going to Lincoln was something that less academic students would end up doing.
Yes, and that's part of the perception, I think, Karen, that if you weren't good at school, you went farming, whereas in actual fact it's the other way around. We need really smart people, the jobs are there and it's very well paid.
I just want to talk about Canterbury. I know that in your role with MAF, you were Adverse Events Coordinator, overseeing the government's response to disasters affecting the rural sector. Now, I imagine most of the time these were weather events, but the Canterbury quake, what did you see? And 18 months down the track, how are the farmers doing down there? What's been the lasting impact?
Well, I think, relatively speaking, the rural sector got off a lot lighter than the central city. The main quake that affected the rural area was the one in September, as opposed to the big one in February. Most of it, Karen, has now been dealt with and farmers moved on. Certainly a lot of damage at the time. I mean, it was very encouraging to see the response from the rural sector. We had, I forget the exact figure now, it might have been 11 or 16 rotary sheds where the platform had flipped off the runners. I thought it might take a couple of weeks to sort that out. Most of them were up and running within 48 hours. Just simply the farmers got together and helped each other. There's one dairy shed there that had 2,000 cows milked through it in 24 hours. So the response was very positive from the rural community itself. Some of the ongoing damage was around liquefaction. Farmers just had to, cultivate the land and re-sow and that sort of thing. Certainly one of the big issues we were worried about at the time was damage to irrigation pipes underground with the land shifting. Luckily that wasn't anywhere near as big as we thought, and most of that's been repaired. So to a large extent the rural sector's sorted itself and is getting on with its life, yeah.
Was that the biggest thing you came across in your time with MAF? As I say, there's all sorts of weather events all the time, but doesn't get much worse than that. No.
Well, in the scheme of events affecting the rural sector, I think the biggest probably were Cyclone Bowler in 1988 and the big drought we had in 2008. They were certainly the drought affected the whole country and cost whatever it was, about $2.8 billion, and that had quite a lasting effect. I mean, some farms are still just getting out of or recovering from the effect of that.
Farmers are nothing if not resilient, though, aren't they?
Absolutely, yes.
Down south, you're from down south. Farmy Army, I guess that was something young farmers got heavily involved in.
We did, and it was a really great experience for us to be involved in. Federated Farmers did a fantastic job pulling that together with ours and Rural Women's support, but the number of farmers coming in was phenomenal, and I got to spend about 8 days helping to organise the farmers, and I think for the most part everybody had a really rewarding experience of getting to actually go in and help. And I think one of the important things was for farmers to understand that townies don't cope well with really big disasters, and I would sort of explain to them, when a townie opens their back door and there's 3 foot deeper liquefaction across their quarter-acre section, they just shut the door. They don't get a shovel. And there were plenty who did, and they had a go, but I think our farmers had a really good time getting out there and really making a difference and doing something that was so visibly changing to people, and the gratitude is there. There's still plenty of stuff to do. Farming Army still has little projects, like right before Christmas there were 700 food hampers we put together, and there's certainly lots of other projects that are going on. And Christchurch still needs a lot of help.
That's it for Straight Talk, brought to you by Straight Furrow. Thank you to my guests this week, Phil Journeaux and Sara Russell. And to you at home for watching. Be sure to check out our website for all the latest and greatest programming. I'm Karen McCarthy, back next time with more Straight Talk.